Hi everyone, I'm Raga D'silva. Welcome to Older Queer Voices, a podcast where we explore the stories, experiences, and contributions of older LGBTQ plus people. Today I'm thrilled to be speaking with Peter Tatchell, one of the UK's most prominent human rights and LGBTQ plus activists. Born in Australia in 1952, Peter moved to London in 1971 and became involved in the Gay Liberation Front. He helped organize the first modern Pride March in 1972, co founded Outrage, and has campaigned tirelessly for equality, justice, and human rights around the world. Peter's activism spans 5 decades and continues today through the Peter Tatchell Foundation. I'm so excited to have Peter Tatchell on our show. Welcome, Peter.
It's a great pleasure to join you. Thank you so much.
I have been seeing you around the community for years now, and it's absolutely a joy, really, to be able to speak with you and listen to your story in your own words. So, thank you. So, Peter, for listeners who may not know your story, can you share how you first became involved in activism and what drew you to the LGBTQ plus rights?
Well, I grew up in Australia in the 1950s and 1960s. The first really significant sort of political event that I can remember was when I was 11 in 1963. I heard about the bombing of a black church in Birmingham, Alabama, by white racists, where 4 young girls about my own age were murdered on a Sunday morning in church. I wasn't black. I wasn't American. I was thousands of miles away, but I knew instantly that was so wrong. And that prompted my interest in and support for the Black Civil Rights Movement in America. But I didn't actually do any campaigning until some years later. In 1967, when I was 15, a man was due to be hanged because the state of Victoria still had the death penalty. He allegedly shot dead a prison warder during a jail escape. I read a summary of the autopsy report in the local newspaper and worked out that from where the escaped prisoner was standing when he fired the fatal shot that killed the prison warder, the bullet would have had to do a U-turn in midair. So I just immediately thought his conviction's unsafe and he should not hang. So I got involved in the campaign to try and stop his execution. We did not succeed. He was executed. And that really, I think really, made me question everything. I just thought, I always was, the government, the police, everybody, the state was there to protect the citizen. It just made me think, well, I can't trust the state. They have executed a man where there's at least some doubt about his guilt. Then the next campaign I got onto was for Black Australian Indigenous Aboriginal rights. I heard that young black kids were leaving school at the minimum age to go out and work because their families needed them to get out and get an income. So I, with others, thought about the idea of why don't we create scholarships to give young Aboriginal kids the equivalent of a wage in order to stay on at school and get an education, get qualifications, get a good job so they can support themselves, their families, and their communities. And then all this was happening at a time when Australia was involved in the Vietnam War alongside the Americans. And pretty soon I realized this was a very unjust, immoral war. We were backing an extreme far-right dictatorship in South Vietnam. The Americans and their allies, including Australia, were involved in the mass indiscriminate bombing and killing of civilians. So I was very much involved in the big anti-Vietnam War protests that took place. I didn't realize I was gay until I was 17 in 1969. And of course, at that time in Melbourne, Australia, there were no LGBT plus groups. no helplines, no switchboards, no counseling services, and definitely no campaign groups. So when I realized I was gay, I felt I wanted to do something. I wanted to fight the injustice that LGBT plus people faced. And at that time, in the state of Victoria, homosexuality was still totally illegal, punishable by several years imprisonment, and even in extreme circumstances by enforced psychiatric incarceration and treatment. So I tried to persuade some of my few gay friends to set up a gay organization to campaign, but they were all too scared. So all I could do was write letters to the press. Now, initially, I didn't dare sign my name, let alone give my address, because I feared a police knock at the door. But over months, gradually, I plucked up the courage to sign my name and eventually give my address as well. I don't know what the impact was. I was challenging criminalization. I was challenging hate crime and violence, but I've got no sense of what those letters may or may not have achieved. So it wasn't until I came to London in 1971 at the age of 19 that I was able to get involved in LGBT plus campaigning through the Gay Liberation Front.
Wow. You started very young, didn't you? So I'm just curious, is it like part of your DNA? Did you have that kind of family environment that at the age of 11 you were able to question and challenge, rights?
Absolutely not. There is
Oh,
nothing in my family background that predisposed me or influenced me towards campaigning. My family were working class conservatives, evangelical Pentecostalists. Our
wow.
whole family life revolved around the family and the church. That was it. But somehow or other, I took, the Sermon on the Mount, love thy neighbor as thyself, be a good Samaritan. I took these Christian teachings as a call to action, to challenge injustice. So I'd never heard of liberation theology, but that's sort of
Yeah.
what I adopted. As a young Christian teenager, I was campaigning for these struggles because I believed in Christ's gospel of love and compassion. I'm no longer religious now, but those religious influences were, pretty pivotal. Although my parents, of course, didn't share any of them. For my parents, being a good Christian was not swearing or drinking, avoiding any sexual behavior whatsoever. That was their version of Christianity.
It's amazing. I think when I started my conversation, just when I introduced you, Peter, I said 5 decades. It's actually 6 decades, over 6 decades. That's a long time to be campaigning and to be fighting the fights that you've been fighting. It's really amazing. I'm so glad that we have you, and we can talk about history as well. So you come to London 1971. You, as a 19-year-old, you arrive here. And then in 1972, you set up the Gay Liberation Front. Did you set it up? Or did you
No,
do the first Pride March?
no. The Gay Liberation Front was set up in 1970.
Okay.
I got involved when I came here in 1971. But in 1972, I was one of a group of about 30 people who helped organise and promote the first ever UK Pride March, which took place on the 1st of July, 1972. And that was a huge gamble because back in those days, most LGBT plus people were closeted. They didn't dare come out or show their faces in public because they feared arrest, discrimination, and violence. So we had no idea how many people would turn up. In the end, there was about 700 of us. We
Wow.
were very, very heavily policed. And some of the police were quite abusive towards us.
Yeah.
But we were, passionate and defiant. And, our slogan was, come out wherever you are. And that first Pride March was all about coming out and showing ourselves that we were not going to be victims anymore. We were going to stand up tall and proud, and we were going to demand our rights.
Yeah. See, to the younger people who are listening, I'd love for them to remember this, that this has started a long, long time ago. And the marches that we have today. They've grown in size, but they are important for us to keep celebrating, of course, but keep protesting as well. So that's wonderful, Peter. I just wanted to understand. I'm going back to 1972. How did you promote the Pride? I mean, what was the medium available to you at that time that 700 people actually turned up?
Well, of course, there was no gay press. There were no websites or internet.
Yeah.
So we promoted it by leafleting gay bars and clubs and just spreading by word of mouth among our LGBT plus friends and allies. It was it was a very well, I suppose amateurish by comparison to today, amateurish effort. But we were pleased with 700 people.
That's a good number.
Yeah, I mean, we feared there might be like 200 or 300. So we were pleased with 700, and of course, because it was a success, because we'd done it, that gave us the confidence to do it again the year after, and the year after, and the year after. And then gradually over the years, Pride has grown in size. So it's now very big, very well funded. Back in the start, the early days, we funded Pride out of our own pockets. We had to pay for everything.
So does it fill you with pride when you see how it's evolved and how it's grown?
Yes and no. I mean, that first Pride was a carnival atmosphere. It was a celebration. It was fun, but also had a very strong political message about our right to freedom and liberation. I think that's been lost a lot in the subsequent years. My Peter Tatchell Foundation is one of the very few organizations in the Pride Parade that marches with an issue, like, challenging or demanding an end to the conversion practices, supporting Ukrainian LGBTs, championing the rights of LGBT plus people in Commonwealth countries, where 29 of those countries still criminalize same-sex relations. So we always come to Pride with an issue because we think it's a platform, it's a means to, put out there our human rights struggle. But most organizations just promote themselves, and that's fine. But there are battles still to fight and win.
Yeah.
We still haven't got a ban on conversion practices. Trans people are victims of horrific, toxic culture wars. We still don't have compensation for gay and bisexual men who were arrested and prosecuted under past homophobic laws. So there's a lot of issues we still should be championing in this country, and never mind the rest of the world. As well as the 29 Commonwealth countries that still criminalize LGBTs, there's over 60 countries in total that still treat us as sex criminals. And there are 12 Muslim majority countries where we can potentially be executed. So the battle has made great progress, sure, but there's still battles to fight and win.
Sure. Peter, just can you paint a picture? I'm just going to go back to the gay scene because you were very young at that time. You still are, but I'm talking about when you're 19, 20, you're in London. You're part of this now community, which you didn't have in Australia. Did you still how did you first of all find the gay bars in those days? That's number one. And when you went into them, did you feel safe? Like now people do talk about safe spaces. So did we have that kind of conversation then?
Well, back in 1971, there were just, I think, 2 gay clubs and about 3 gay bars. That was it in all of London. And the way you found out about it was just by word of mouth. They didn't advertise. There was no LGBT plus press but of course, the Gay Liberation Front set up what was the forerunner of a switchboard. LGBT plus switchboard was begun by the Gay Liberation Front, and people used to phone us up and we would then tell them where the gay bars and clubs were. Back in those days, they were all very discreet, because they feared police raids, because they feared attacks by far right and homophobic mobs. So it was all very word of mouth, really. And I wouldn't say they felt particularly safe, but they weren't unsafe either. But you always had a nagging doubt that there could be a police raid. And I remember in the early 1970s, the police raided the Father Redcap in Camberwell in South London and made arrests because men were dancing together. They weren't having sex, they were just dancing together, and this was deemed an offence by the Metropolitan Police, and the owner in particular got into big trouble. There were other instances where LGBT plus people would go to a straight pub just for a drink, and if they were perceived to be gay, or perhaps they were wearing a gay liberation badge, sometimes they'd be refused service. And there's nothing you could do, because in those days, publicans and anybody was entitled by law to discriminate against LGBT plus people. And there was nothing you could do about it. We couldn't do anything about it whatsoever.
Wow. I mean, it's hard to believe that now, that we lived in a time when these things were happening around us. So when did the things start changing? When did it become easier? And I know we have a long way to go, but when did it become easier for you to just go out and say, like, I'm gay, and not have those kind of extreme fears that we face, or homophobia that we have faced?
Well, that's actually quite recent. I would really say that only in the last 2 decades, from about the year 2000 or so, that things have got much easier. I mean, there was a gradual, slow process of easing the repression in the late 1980s and early 1990s. But it wasn't uniform, and it was confined to big cities like Manchester, Birmingham, and London. In smaller towns and cities, it was still quite tough. But I'd say that really the Gay Liberation Front created the LGBT plus community. There wasn't a community before the Gay Liberation Front. Yeah, there were circles of friends and networks, but there wasn't a sense of community. And the Gay Liberation Front created that by setting up Icebreakers, the first counseling service for LGBT plus people by LGBT plus people, which gave a positive affirmative measure, a supportive measure for people's sexuality or gender identity. We set up the first gay media, Gay News, the fortnightly newspaper. We, as I said, set up the forerunner of Switchboard, advice and helpline for LGBT plus people. There were lots and lots of things that the Gay Liberation Front did that made a community possible. And it was a slow, I suppose, a fairly slow process over time that community emerged, expanded, and got comfortable. It didn't happen overnight.
Sure.
It was a slow process. And of course, in the 1980s, we suffered a massive backlash, partly in response to the AIDS pandemic, and the hysteria and discrimination and horrific violence that followed that, but also partly due to the Conservative government. Margaret Thatcher had 2 big campaigns for family values and then for a return to Victorian values. And in neither of those campaigns was there any space for LGBT plus people. And then, of course, this all culminated in Section 28 in 1988, the first new anti-gay law in Britain for 100 years. And that, as you think resulted in LGBT plus kids in schools being denied support, information, advice. And it set back the movement very badly. And the culmination of all this was a huge spike in queer bashing violence. So between 1986 and 1991, from local newspaper clippings that I was sent, which is not the most, not all of them, I identified 51 men who were murdered in circumstances that pointed to a homophobic attack. For example, they weren't robbed. They were, stabbed 20, 30, 50 times, mutilation of their genitals, things like that. And of course, the police were doing nothing or next to nothing to solve those murders because we were queers. We didn't deserve it, and then at the same time, the police were putting huge resources into arresting gay and bisexual men for consenting victimless behavior. Because although there had been a decriminalization of homosexuality or male homosexuality in 1967, it was very partial and very limited. So many aspects of gay male life remained criminal. And so by 1989, the number of gay and bisexual men convicted for consenting behavior between adults was almost as great as in 1954-55, when male homosexuality was totally illegal and when the country was gripped by an anti-gay witch hunt. So that's the context where in the 1980s, things went into reverse. But on the plus side, this repression, and particularly Section 28, galvanized the community to come together. So the 1988 London Pride Parade, the first one after the passage of Section 28, hit 29,000 people, double what it had been the year before. And then each year afterwards, it grew exponentially, so that by the late 1990s, there were over 100,000 people on the parade. It took 5 or 6 hours to pass a single point. And in 1997, there were over 300,000 people at the post-Pride festival on Clapham Common. So that shows how from 700 people in 1972 to 100,000 on the parade and 300,000 at the festival, that's a huge, huge growth.
It is.
It's an extraordinary achievement.
Yeah. And Peter, I just going to spend a minute to just give the listeners a trigger warning. I should have said this earlier. We will go into dark places, and please be aware that if you need to take a break during this time, please do. But just be warned that there will be conversations around AIDS and death and suicide as well, if at all. Peter, I'm just want to know, as a young person, with all this happening around you, how did you manage your emotional health at that time?
Well, perhaps let me start by saying that back in the late 1960s in Melbourne, there were no LGBT plus organizations or role models. Apart from a couple of gay people I met at work, there was no visibility for LGBT plus people. No public figures were out. None whatsoever. So I didn't have a template in terms of LGBT plus campaigning. What I did was I took my template from the Black civil rights movement in America. I studied that movement assiduously to learn about their ideals and values, their methods of campaigning. And the prime method was nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience, as espoused by Dr. Martin Luther King and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee led by Stokely Carmichael. So I adapted their ideas and values to the struggle for LGBT plus freedom. So when I came to London in 1971, I sort of embraced and practiced those kinds of tactics and methods. So, for example, modeled on the sit-ins by Black Americans in white restaurants that refused to serve them, I did sit-ins in pubs in London, which even in 1971, some were refusing to serve LGBT plus people. So we did the same kind of tactic. We sat in, refused to leave, and they called the police, and we were either arrested or forcibly thrown out on the pavement. So that's how I got into the kind of activism I do. It was inspired by the Black Civil Rights Movement in America. But also I learned some history. You know, I was inspired by Mohandas Gandhi and the tactics that he used in the struggle for Indian independence, and by Sylvia Pankhurst, the suffragette leader, who was not only, you know, a great campaigner for women's rights, but also for the rights of working class people. You know, she was a socialist who believed in women's rights as part of a spectrum of rights for everyone. So I had those role models, which sort of guided me and, you know, inspired my activism.
Yeah.
People often say, you know, what motivates you, what gets you going, and it's very simple. I know it might sound corny to some people, but it's love. Love. I love other people. I love freedom, equality, justice. I don't like to see people suffering. You know, I want to do something to change things, to help change things. It's not me, of course, alone, and I'm just one of many. But you know, that's the motivation. Now, of course, in the course of all this campaigning, you know, I have had some pretty tough experiences. I've been involved in over 3,000 protests over the last 59 years. Many of them direct action, non-violent, and some of them civil disobedience, where I've broken the law consciously and deliberately because that law is unjust. So, for example, when the unequal age of consent still existed, when it was still 21 for gay and bisexual men compared to 16 for straight men and women, I and others, we openly declared to the police that we had broken the law, that we had, you know, when I was 19, when I came to London in 1971, then the age of consent was 21. And so every time I had sex, I was committing a criminal act. So together with others, we would defy the law. We would tell the police, we are 19, we've had sex, it's against the law, arrest us, as a way to challenge the injustice of that legislation. And I think, you know, as I say, I am one, we are many. I've never been the only person. You know, people often say it's all about me. It's not. I've been part of a wider, bigger movement, and it's you know, thanks to all of us who've made the changes happen. But as well as those protests, although those protests have resulted in a total of 104 arrests or detentions by the police.
Wow.
I mean, just to give you one example, back in the 1990s, when I was involved in the LGBT plus direct action group Outrage, every year when Parliament was opened, when the Queen gave her Queen's speech setting out the government's legislative programme, we would stand in Parliament Square demanding gay law reform. And we would be arrested for simply holding a placard calling for gay law reform, because the police said that was offensive. They said it will provoke angry reactions, and therefore we're arresting you. Unbelievable now, but that is what actually happened.
Yeah.
So 104 arrests or detentions by the police. But on even worse, I've had more than 300 violent assaults, mostly homophobes and far-right extremists, plus about just over 50 attacks upon my flat, mostly bricks and bottles through the windows, but also homophobic graffiti painted on my front door, 3 arson attacks, and even a bullet through my front door. That has been scary. And as a result of that violence, I have for many years suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, or what my doctors say is actually ongoing traumatic stress disorder, because post means it stopped. It happened before, whereas I keep on having these experiences. But I sustain myself by the knowledge that I am helping change things, and that's a great motivator, and it helps cushion the burden. Also, I always put things in perspective. If I was a human rights defender in Iran or Russia or Uganda or Bangladesh, I'd probably be dead, or at very least arrested, jailed, tortured. So I think to myself, hey, I'm lucky, I'm not in, I haven't had any of those experiences. I've got off lightly. So that, putting things in that perspective helps me, cope with the tribulations that I've experienced.
And you still talk about love. To me, when I'm listening to your story, I'm thinking, how can a person go through all that? And in some cases, you have voluntarily, protested and put yourself in situations, and then been assaulted and have had your arsons and stuff. How does a person like that stay together and still want to build a community and still want to love people and still want to make things? And I know you spoke about motivation, but I'm really interested in knowing, because the younger generation needs to learn from this, because a lot of us give up because it is just too much for us. So how do you sustain, and what would you tell the younger generation?
Well, I don't want to pretend it's been easy. There have been moments when the violence against me, the police harassment, it has been very, very taxing. It's put a big mental and physical toll on me. And, I've had periods of very, very dark periods of severe depression. There've even been times when I have had suicidal thoughts, because it seems so bad. But, I just take a deep breath and then sort of get over it. And I suppose one of the things that also keeps me going is the knowledge that over the years, I've probably personally helped well over 20,000 people, victims of hate crime and discrimination, refugees and asylum seekers, victims of miscarriages of justice. I've helped so many people over the years. I just think I've got to keep going, because there's going to be more, and there is every year. There's more and more people come to me, asking for help and advice and support in their struggles, and I just think, well, to be able to do that, to be able to do something that transforms someone's life for the better. It's not just about the big campaigns, it's about transforming individual lives. That's such a huge honor and a privilege. And, it makes me happy. It gives me joy. It spurs me to carry on through the dark moments. But, I'm not pretending I'm sort of this great, strong warrior. I am quite fragile. And apart from anything else, it's just the workload, the sheer volume. I get thousands and thousands of messages and requests every week, probably close to 7, 8, maybe 9,000 a week.
Oh, wow.
And to cope, just to answer them and deal with them, just the physical dealing, never mind the heartbreaking stories and the horror stories that I get told. That's a huge emotional burden. It is tough. It is tough.
Yeah. So just on that, do you get support from your foundation, your Peter Tatchell Foundation? I know you're the foundation, but with your team, are you able to respond to 9,000 emails or messages, and these conversations that people need to have? And I'm one of them. I reached out to you. You're very, very quick in responding. So how does the Peter Tatchell Foundation work, and what does it do?
Well, we have myself. I've got an assistant, Pliny Sukamani. Then I have 2 other part-timers. And then I have a board of trustees who oversee the foundation to make sure we're doing our job and everything. So I get support from them. I've got a wonderful partner, Ferdinand. You know, he is my rock and keeps me going and comforts me when times are hard, as do my foundation staff and trustees. The Peter Tatchell Foundation, about half of our work is on LGBT plus issues, and the other half on broader other human rights issues like free speech, the right to protest, the rights of refugees, of religious and non-religious minorities, the whole gamut. Then I'd say that about 50% of the work we do is based in the UK, supporting UK work, and about 50% is supporting human rights defenders and campaigns in other countries. So we've been doing a lot in recent years supporting LGBTs in Uganda, where the new anti-homosexuality law prescribes the death penalty for repeat gay offenders. We've done a lot of work supporting LGBTs in Russia and the anti-war movement there. A lot supporting Ukraine's right to self-defense and self-determination against Russia's invasion, including amplifying the voices of LGBT plus Ukrainians as well. They have a big double battle. They've got the battle against the Russian invaders and also the battle against, some quite strong homophobic views in Ukraine. Although that is progressing, it's getting better, and compared to Russia, Ukraine is far, far better for LGBT plus people.
Yeah, of course.
And then, of course, during the Gaza war, we were doing a lot to oppose Israel's indiscriminate attacks on civilian areas and the monstrous murder of 20,000 Palestinian children. 20,000 Palestinian children killed by the Israeli attacks. Now, I've got no time for Hamas, and I'm very critical of Hamas. But even though the October 7th attack was a monstrous massacre, a terrorist attack, totally unjustified, that does not give the Israelis the right to indiscriminately attack Palestinian civilians. And, looking at Hamas as an organization, I've been opposed to it ever since it was formed. It oppresses Palestinian people. In Gaza, first of all, Hamas never won a majority of the vote. They seized power. They've never held an election for the last 2 decades. There's no free speech, no right to protest, no women's rights, no LGBT plus rights, no right to form trade unions. It's a dictatorship. And so, as well as opposing what Israel is doing, my foundation has also sought to expose Hamas's crimes against Palestinian people. And, we support the majority leadership of the Palestinians who want a two-state solution where Jews and Arabs can live side by side in peace with security, human rights, and democracy for everyone.
Sure. Peter, what about Afghanistan? Country, is the way women are treated there, as you know. And just 2 days ago, they talked about that it is not violence as long as, the bones are not broken, for instance. Women can't go out, there's no education. So are you also fighting that fight?
Absolutely, yes. We've been very strong in opposing the Taliban and supporting women's rights, LGBT plus rights, and other civil society organizations. So we have been helping, in particular, LGBT plus people get out of Afghanistan. But sadly, the British government has refused them all asylum, even though they're on death lists posted by the Taliban. The British government will not give them asylum. It's absolutely shocking.
So
Absolutely
where do they
shocking.
go? Where are they supposed to go?
It's probably best if I don't say, but
Okay,
let's just say neighboring countries or
sure.
countries nearby.
Okay.
But they're
Wow.
stuck there. They're stuck there.
How terrible, how terribly tragic. Peter, as I listen to you, you talk about so many experiences you've had. One thing I want to understand amongst all your, activism, which has been one of the most challenging experience for you, that you still feel that it is unresolved.
That's a really hard question to
Hard
ask.
question.
I mean,
Just
you probably know that in 2022, shortly before the Football World Cup in Qatar, I went there and staged a one-person protest in front of the National Museum to highlight the abuse of LGBTs in Qatar, where they face imprisonment and sometimes torture and forcible or forced or pressured conversion practices, psychological abusive practices where they're detained in centers where they're subjected to brainwashing in an attempt to turn them straight. And I also highlighted in the interviews the second-class legal status of women and the abuse of migrant workers in Qatar. Now, obviously, that did not change things, but what it did do is raise global awareness about those abuses. And there is some evidence that some of the worst excesses in Qatar have been somewhat reduced. I would not resolved at all, but they have, I think the witch hunting of gay people in Qatar is now not as severe as it was. In terms of women's rights, that's a bit more difficult to say, but it seems that more women in Qatar are getting an education and being able to take up new jobs they were previously excluded from. On migrant workers, some improvement, but nowhere near enough. Nowhere near enough. So that's clearly something I did, which is still unresolved.
wow, and hopefully it will be resolved over time and sooner than we expect. Peter, I've been running out of time, but I've got two questions for you. Two more questions. I want to come back to the present here now. So, trans rights we talked about is under, so much of it's so difficult. I know. So, how do you see the communities coming together to support the trans, people here?
Well, I think most LGBT people have rallied to support their trans siblings. Most. There is a small minority who have been sucked into anti-trans culture wars. That's very sad. But most of our community does want to see respect, dignity, and rights for our trans siblings. Clearly, that's a battle that is ongoing and still awaits resolution. But we just have to keep up the fight, and we have to keep on, saying that trans rights are human rights, and we need to challenge those who want to do down trans people with stereotypes, scapegoating, vilification, and other abuses. That's just not right. And I would say that, contrary to those who seem to suggest that trans is a new phenomenon, well, back in the Gay Liberation Front days, we had trans activists who were in the Gay Liberation Front, and we championed trans rights way back then. So this is nothing new, even though some anti-trans people claim it to be.
I finally want to ask you about older queer voices. I use the term queer, deliberately we use the term queer, we want to reclaim it. What do you think about this term queer, and how does it sit with you? Because I'm sure you've been through quite a stuff around queer being, negative connotation around queer. So what do you think about the word queer?
Well, way back in Outrage in 1990, we had this discussion, and we decided to reclaim queer as a symbol of pride and defiance, as a way of destroying the negative, hurtful impact. And so when we demand queer rights, when we demand queer liberation, we're using queer in an affirmative, positive, uplifting way.
Brilliant.
So it has echoes of the way in which earlier generations of African Americans reclaimed the word black. In the old days, black was quite a negative term, quite a negative term for African Americans. So they reclaimed it. And that's what we're doing with queer.
Great.
We're reclaiming a word that was used to hurt and disparage us. And I think it's a good thing. And also, it's much easier to say than LGBT plus.
I agree. Although I said I was going to ask you a last question, I'm going to ask you, you okay? Do you need water?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you this question in terms of what now for Peter Tatchell?
Well, I'm 74. Been doing this campaigning for 59 years. And health willing, I intend to carry on for at least another 20 years.
Brilliant.
Maybe retirement in my late 90s.
Yeah.
My grandfather lived to 97, and he was quite active until he was 94 or so. So hopefully I've got his genes, and I shall carry on. But the passion and enthusiasm for LGBT plus and other human rights is just as great today as it was when I began in the 1960s.
Wow.
I'm still want to help change things. I want to work with others so that we together can make the change.
Very rarely I get these vibes coming from the screens, and your passion and it's just your love for the community, and the fact that you are motivated even at 74 to continue 20 years. I'm thinking, oh gosh, that's a long time, but brilliant. We need you, Peter, and I'm glad that we have you here. And thank you so much. Is there anything you want to share before I end this conversation today?
Well, I'd love to say thank you to your viewers and listeners for being here, and also say that every week my foundation puts out a weekly newsletter on a range of LGBT plus and other human rights issues. Some of them off the radar that you probably hadn't heard about. We always try and include some funny, quirky one to give you a laugh as well. But what you can do is to sign up to receive the newsletter. It's totally free. There's no charge. Go to our website, petertatchellfoundation.org. In the top right-hand corner, there's a button which says Join Us. So you click on that button and you give us your email address, and we will send you the weekly newsletter. It comes out every Thursday morning. So no charge, totally free. But if you do feel able to support us financially, that would be great, because we don't get any grants or any funding from the government or foundations or corporations. We depend entirely on well-wishers like you. So next to the Join Us button on the top right-hand corner of the homepage is Donate. And if you can afford to give us, £2 or £3 or £5 or more a month, that would be great, because that gives us the income to sustain what we do, to carry on.
Absolutely. I think that's a good call, Peter. We will make sure, I know that Nicholas put the website there. We'll put the website details and the donation link on our caption as well. So those listening, please make sure you go to www.petertatchellfoundation.org. Make sure that you look up that button on the right, join, and receive newsletters. Please do make a donation. This is a great cause. It's not just for the foundation, it's for all of us and our future. So thank you so much again, Peter, for joining us and sharing your experiences, insights, and wisdom. Your dedication really has shaped the movement and continues to inspire people around the world. And I'm one of those people. I've not been around in London for too long, but ever since I've been here and ever since my story came out and I went public with my story, there's one name that has kept coming into, around my circles, and that's Peter Tatchell. So thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for listening, for your support. Please share feedback, comment, share this episode widely. If you want to nominate someone, please feel free to write to us at theviewsroom@gmail.com. I also want to take the opportunity to thank Nicola Fenton, who works in the background and makes this possible, and to our outreach partners. It's Outspoken Speakers, My G Work, Proud HR, Out and Wild, GFW Clothing, and Ageism is Never in Style. Thank you. Keep amplifying our voice as well, and see you soon.
Can I just finish by saying my motto to perhaps give people a bit of hope and inspiration? It's very simple. Don't accept the world as it is. Dream of what the world could be, and then help make it happen.
Wow. Can you repeat that again, Peter, please?
Don't accept the world as it is. Dream of what the world could be, and then help make it happen.
Wow. We all need to listen to this many, many times, write this down, read it every day, and let this be our motto as well. Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you to the listeners.